happen. Here to talk about it, Captain Sherry Walker, a commercial airline pilot. Welcome.
Thank you, and good morning.
Good morning.
Well, Sherry, first, what does this say about Boeing, one of the largest companies in the world, responsible for millions of lives every day? They can't even pass their own internal audit. Why? Because as Betsy pointed out, many of the records are no longer accessible. What are your thoughts?
Well, it's unfortunate, but Boeing has got a serious problem right now, and they need to return to a safety culture. Unfortunately, after the merger with McDonnell Douglas, they tacked away from their normal leadership that had been in place for decades, where they were led by engineers and these safety conscious types. And they've turned more to an organization that's run by financiers. The current CEO is a former hedge fund manager whose $22 million last year bonuses weren't tied to safety and quality. They were tied to ESG and diversity, equity, and inclusion programs.
Wow, that's an amazing thing to hear. They're more concerned about DEI than whether the bolts are put on the proper doors. That's pretty concerning. I wanted to ask you about the American Airlines flight that had a very rough emergency landing at LAX, also a Boeing plane.
Well, you know, the NTSB, the fine men and women there, will do that investigation, and I'm really not in a position to comment on it. They need time to do their job. But I will say that the pilots at American, Delta, Southwest, United, they are some of the best in the country, and I am sure they handled it by their checklists and had a successful outcome.
Right. Do you think passengers should worry about flying on a Boeing plane?
No, I think the first line of defense, like I say, is me. Of course, don't forget that DEI and ESG stuff, it's systemic. It's not just at the manufacturers, it's at the regulators, and it's in the airlines. And a lot of us are pushing back against it because what needs to be first is safety. We will always have our passengers' safety first and foremost. I mean, let's face it, I don't like to say it this way, but I get there a split second before you. So we have families and we have interest in ensuring a safe and successful outcome. So we're still flying them. You should still fly them too.
You know, pilots and flight attendants, they all go through a step-by-step process before that plane takes off. The same thing applies to the manufacturing process. You know, if there are 10 steps, you don't go from 1 to 7 and then go back, and then because at the end you don't know if you missed steps. So you go 1, 2, 3, 4 in order. That's how the manufacturing process works. So when you look at that, Boeing has some serious internal processes issues, as well as the monitoring and controlling functions. So do you see this as a serious management or engineering issue, not a labor issue, or it's a little bit of everything?
Well, we probably don't have enough time to discuss the entire process, but I would say there's two big issues here. So Boeing, around the time of the development of the MAX, started to outsource, right? It's decentralized its rented facilities from a manufacturing facility to an assembly line. It subcontracted out. The holes are built in Wichita. A lot of the engineering was outsourced overseas to $9 an hour engineers, right? Those $134,000 Boeing engineers now are removed from the process. At the same time, they relocated their headquarters away from the factory and into Chicago, which, to be more centralized, people forget Boeing is a huge defense contractor. They make helicopters and tanks and all kinds of neat things.
Right.
But now, when they have the opportunity to bring it all back in-house and put it back together and use good quality assurance, what does Boeing decide to do? Chicago wasn't good enough. We need to move our headquarters a little closer to those places that regulate us. So they moved to the suburbs of Washington, D.C., where all the lobbyists are. Boeing needs to put it back together quickly.
Well, it does sound as if there should be a concern on a culture of safety. I want to ask you another question that's been in the news a lot, and that is the threat to passengers from terrorism on the planes, because we see so many people in the country illegally. 15 out of the 19 terrorists who hijacked planes on 9/11 were in the country illegally. And now we hear so many more are coming in. They're not vetted. They're even allowed to get on airplanes without photo ID. So what's your take on that issue? How can passengers feel confident?
Well, I know that we will never have another 9/11. Those folks on that airplane, the last one in Shanksville, they stood up. So our last line of defense is actually you, the passengers, but more importantly, the safety systems. A lot of them I can't speak about because there is safety sensitive information, but the hardened cockpit doors, the things that corporate security does behind the scenes to vet people. We know who is on our airplane, and we know who the threats are, and passengers should not be aware, but don't have a lot of worry. That is not first and foremost. That one we've handled pretty well.
Well,
Thank you.
Well, Captain Walker, I admire you.
Oh,
Why?
thank you.
Because if I had to do it all over again, folks, I would not have gone to Wall Street. I would actually be a pilot. I love to fly.
Well, thank you. I do love my job. I'm blessed.
Awesome.
That's wonderful.
Well, thanks for joining First Edition.
Thank you.